deception. And after more than 25 years on offense, I decided to start helping people on defense. That was more than 10 years ago. And while I enjoy offense, what I discovered was the majority of people do not have basic fundamentals of defense in place. So we'll start talking a little bit about the different concepts. But the scary part is when you start looking at it, we continue to spend money on cybersecurity products. And while cybersecurity products can help us secure our networks, they cannot save us. So we started looking at different mechanisms. And the main thing we have to understand is the TCP/IP protocol, which is the main protocol for the network, was developed in the 60s, the late 60s. And then in 1972, it was ratified. The last update was 1987. So the reality is we're running our networks still on a protocol that was developed many years ago. And the size of the networks today was never expected. Furthermore, these networks are based on a principle of trust. Okay, so since these networks are based on the principle of trust, we're looking at these different challenges. And we have the challenges from this principle of trust because we have to actually hear the different things on the network. If I tell you I'm a specific source, you're going to believe me. So unfortunately, the way we've been doing our network security has to change. So what we have to do is we have to accept the fact that these attackers are breaking into networks, right? Since they're breaking into networks, we're going to have to accept the fact that the reality is somebody's going to click. And when our users click, that gives access. So we have to accept this fact and start learning a way to actually deal with this. And the way we deal with this is we prepare for them to get into our networks. We accept the fact that everything we're doing, all these products, everything we've done is what? It's a solution that has failed. When you look at the patches, you look at everything we do, 100 billion US dollars estimated in 2019, we still had breaches. So we have to accept the fact that we have to think of defense a different way. And after being on offense for all those years, I wanted to start helping people do defense. And the way you help people do defense is make them understand somebody's going to get in your network. No matter what we do, people are going to click. So as I go through the presentation here, I want to show you the concepts where we have to start thinking differently. And I'll admit, one of the first things I always do as a pen tester, I love finding, they call it the low-hanging fruit. But we have to understand as a defender that the attacker is mapping the attack surface. So we have to know that attack surface. So the first step is you have to, in your organization, understand what your attack surface is based on your different network segments. And we're going to go through different concepts here because all those years of 25 years plus testing, we broke in 100%. We broke in every time. We never failed to break into the network. So because of that, we have to change our way of thinking. We have to accept the fact that they're going to get in. So let's look at some specific things. We're going to talk about the attack data. What's it showing us? Because the reality is most of the breaches are not sophisticated breaches. Fundamentals of defense will block these breaches. And we'll talk about that because, unfortunately, a lot of people tell you that we've already lost the race. Some say losing the race, different types of concepts. And the reality is, no matter what we do, all products will have vulnerabilities. So we have to accept that and figure out ways that when that new zero-day vulnerability or a patch is not released comes out, what do? We have to make sure we're ready for that. And the best example is during this conference, we had a big critical vulnerability in Cisco. And we're not just calling out Cisco. There's lots of vulnerabilities on different things. And this one was in the Cisco router iOS, or the operating system for the actual device itself. All of you with a Cisco router all of a sudden had a huge vulnerability you had to deal with. So this is the reality that we're losing this race unless we've already lost it, as some say. So some people have a hard time understanding this. But our patch system's broken. It's the best we have, but it's broken. I'll give you an example. The second Tuesday of the month, we all know, listen to this hopefully, it's Microsoft Patch Tuesday. It doesn't mean that patches just come out on that day. Microsoft does it to give security shops and organizations a date to target to know on this day we have to see where the vulnerabilities are. And once we know what those vulnerabilities are, we have to figure out a plan to do what? Patch it. The reality is, of those of you listening, how many people patch it within 24 hours? And I'll look at the app at the end and go through the questions and leave some time for that. And that's the problem with the system, because what we do in the hacking world, as soon as that vulnerability patch comes out from Microsoft, we start running our tools to diff it, to reverse engineer it, and we find weakness. And once we find weakness, we write an exploit for it. So that's why our next topic is deception, because we have to accept the fact that somehow either that 0-day vulnerability that comes out on Patch Tuesday or the big Cisco vulnerability just come out, we're going to probably get a breach. And the data holds that out. We see there are breaches. So what we do is we wait and have deception. And deception is, I know you're going to get in my network, but you find what's real and what's a ghost. And as I get through this and I get towards the end, I'll give you some empirical data, because we have successfully deployed this on multiple conferences at the Capture the Flag and those types of things to show people that just by deploying the basic concepts of deception, you can confuse and frustrate the hackers. And that's the whole goal of this. And then we'll look at some tools of deception. And that's one thing I want you to understand. It's not new. And this is the frustrating part for me, is coming from a military government background. We were dealing with these problems when we put internet access to U.S. Navy warships in 1993. So this stuff is not new. What's changed is our networks are so much broader, so much vast, they're expanded. So this makes the challenge even more, but the concepts are not new. So we want to start looking at what can we do when we accept the fact the attackers might get into our networks. So here's the thing that if you look at, and this is from the Verizon Data Breach Report, financial gain, big key driver for cybercrime, definitely things like that. And external actors, 70%. And that's kind of surprising, because when people start looking at the fact that the external attackers are increasing in percentage, what about the insider threat? Everybody likes to talk about the insider threat. And it's valid, don't get me wrong. But we have to protect from the outside first and then the inside as well. But the scary part is right here. Credential theft. Social engineering. I've seen a lot of posts on that during the conference here, looking at the app topics and stuff like that. Huge problem today. Why? Because it relies on the humans being tricked. And we can all be tricked. Even IT people can be tricked. And this is why I explain to people. If I get a good enough lure or something to attract you, you're going to click. And that's why we have to accept the fact users are going to click. And the scary part is users will click more than one time. And that's the thing that scares me the most. And then 30% of the credential thefts, stolen or weak credentials, right? And then phishing, and then human error, all these different types of things, configuration errors. So we have to understand, no matter what products we put in place, if the user clicks, that's that initial access, right? So when they get that initial access, depending on how you've set up your environment, depends on what they were able to do when they get that initial access. And what I try to explain to people is, it's an old concept, but I see the failure of following it today. And that concept is principal least services, least privileges. Don't give people more privileges or access than they need. And I keep seeing this over and over again. As we go through some of these concepts and we talk about it, like I said, we first got to think about the basics. And then when we get the basics right, we got to think about the advanced. And this is the concern. We have to make sure we understand that everything we do increases our attack surface. And this is with the app. Great app. The WOVA app is a great app. But by downloading that app, we've increased our attack surface. Now, there could be nothing in the app, no vulnerabilities or anything, but over time, somebody could see that app and start targeting that app, and the next thing you know, there's a vulnerability in that app. So after the conference, if we still have that app installed, we have to be aware of that vulnerability, or we could be breached. And that's the reality of everything we have here. we're seeing breaches. No matter what we do, we're seeing breaches. And that's why I continue to say we have to rethink how we do our security. And the scary part is, if you look at the last 10 years of breach reports, the percentage of attacks is between 65 and 90% basic fundamental attacks. They're not sophisticated attacks. And the data will bear this out as we talk about it. We'll look at some historical data for this. So the frustrating thing for me being on offense and having 100% success rate the whole 6 years of leading Department of Defense Red Team, we always broke into networks because of the basics. People forgot the fundamentals. So once you do those basics or the fundamentals, you can block the majority of these attacks. Years ago, the Office of Signals Directive, the OSD out of Australia, they came out and they explained that if you followed the top 4 controls that they had out of 32 controls that they have today, you would block 85% of the attacks. And this is the reality. We have to start doing that. And my experience is, based on all the offensive pen testing, everything else we do, people don't do the basics. And don't get me wrong, I love being on offense and pen testing. But like I said, after that 25 years of being on offense, I realized we have to help people do what? Defend. They need to learn how to defend their networks. And that's why I started the defensive and wrote the Advanced Network Defense and wrote several different online courses on defense. And this is the scary part. I think it's 2 years old now. It's from 2018. But Nuremberg University out of Europe, they did a study. And when they did that study, they discovered that when they talked to people and they interviewed them, and the people said they knew it was bad to click because of the risk, they were still going to click. And that's the scary part. They decided what? It's worth the risk. We want to click. So as I said, even IT people can be deceived. We were doing an engagement in Europe, and they kind of like their soccer, as we say in America, or football, as they say pretty much everywhere else in the world. So we had social engineering. And what was we doing with the social engineering? With the social engineering, we were going to send email, phishing, most common way. So I went to the team, and we had a team meeting. And in the team meeting, we said, how can we set up an effective lure of a phishing attack? And we decided that since football or soccer was such a popular topic, let's send an email with the subject line, Cristiano Ronaldo injured in a car accident. Now, we were in Spain, and some of you listening probably are aware of Cristiano Ronaldo and the football player. He, at the time, was playing for Real Madrid. So since he was playing for Real Madrid, and we were in Spain, and we were even in Madrid, Spain, guess what? We sent that email in with a subject line, Cristiano Ronaldo in a car accident, with attachments of an actual car accident. 100%. Everybody opened that email. Everybody opened the attachments. Furthermore, most started clicking on links and going and searching the internet for what? More details. More details of what happened to Cristiano Ronaldo. So that's why no matter who you are, you can be tricked. Now, let's look at the data breach investigation report, some of the tactics. And we still look up here, even though we talk a lot about social engineering. Look what's on the top there on the left hand of the image. When you look at these images, this is figure 2, right? Again, 2020 data breach investigations. And you see 45% of the breaches were still hacking. So even though we know users can click, this 45% of the hacking, and we got 70% of them external, we need to find a better way, because these external attackers are hacking into our systems because of what? Our attack surface. I tell this clients all the time, and I'll talk about the process of security testing, and one step of that is penetration testing as we continue on. But I tell the clients all the time, and what I tell them is we have to do what? We have to get the basics right, the fundamentals right. These are the things you have to start with. Until you have that, there's no reason to go after that sophisticated threat. And then, of course, there's your social attacks, right? there's your malware, and you start getting another idea of how the trends are going. But this part is scary. Errors, configuration errors. And those of you listening, if you've done network configurations, you know this can be a significant challenge. So when you have these configuration errors, you have to make sure you don't make mistakes. And we all have these types of mistakes. As we said, we had the 70% external actors, and then, of course, the organized crime, which is kind of scary in itself because organized crime is going to have a lot of resources. And remember, anybody has the more resources they have, the larger the campaign, the attack they can launch against us. And these are the types of things we have to be aware of when we're doing our different types of what? Risk management. See, when you flip the hat to the offensive side, we're trying to map your attack surface. And from that attack surface, determine weaknesses, vulnerabilities. Now, on the defensive side, we want to think just like the offensive person. We want to know if they map our attack surface, what is that attack surface? And once we know that attack surface, we can identify how can we mitigate the risk. That's what risk management's all about, right? Because we know two things. If our business or mission need requires us to do it, we're going to do it. So we're going to have to get that in acceptable level of risk. And that's our challenge. We have to determine our what? Risk tolerance. What's our risk tolerance? How much risk are we willing to accept on our network? And this is why, despite doing this for many years, we have to rethink our approach. And that's what this deception concept is all about. Like I said, it's not new. We're deploying deception in the 90s in the military and the government. We just kind of forgot about it, right? But before we get to that, we got to make sure the basic fundamentals of defense are in place. That's critical as well. And you see some other commonalities. So let's go ahead and start looking at the breach. This is, again, the scary part. This is 2020, getting towards the end, the 9th month of 2020. And we're still talking about what? Credentials. Credentials. Passwords have been around since the beginning of all this stuff. And here we're in 2020, all these years later, and we're talking about what? Credentials. So please, can anybody answer me? Why is anybody running networks today, especially with any sensitive data or anything else, and not having multi-factor authentication? Because multi-factor authentication is the key, right? I won't go through this exact example down here. You can take a look at it at your time. But it's a perfect example of how a lot of people thought, in this case, iPhone was more secure than others. And then we found a whole repository of iPhone vulnerabilities that were in the wild being exploited. And that's what this example is. So I don't get into what vendor here has this vulnerability or that vulnerability. Because in our organizations, anytime we install any software, the WOVA app is an example of that. We have to track the vulnerabilities of it for its entire lifetime. So the entire time we've had that app installed until the time we either uninstall it or we move to a new phone and not install the new one, we have to track those vulnerabilities. Because what people don't understand is once you install that app, you're accepting the risk. You're accepting the risk of that software for its entire lifetime. And that's a hard thing for people to actually grasp. And this example here shows you the iPhone, because of those exploitations we discovered, was being infected with spyware. So they had to send the data in, and the spyware was there. And when you click the link, and remember, users can be deceived. That's what social engineering is all about. When they click that link, it downloaded onto that actual device and infected it. And that brings me to another thing. It's 2020, and everybody tries to make it out that all this stuff is new. It's not new. That device, that iPhone, is just a client, and you're talking to a server. Since the beginning, we've had a client-server network communication relationship, and that's what you have to understand. It's not this special super science that is new. It's just now we have the power to put computers in small devices. But the concepts are not the same. And we're going to talk about that when we talk about the different approaches, because the concepts were the same when we started this in 1993, when we put internet access to U.S. Navy warships. The only difference is We're huge and we got processing power. We didn't have this processing power back then, all right? So please understand that as we look at different things. All right. So I already talked about this opening, so I won't talk about that too much anymore. But I'll just talk about here. No product will make us secure. We can't be secure with products. They assist us in security, but they can't secure us because if we leave the door open, people's going to come through the open door and the product's not going to stop us, all right? So that's what we have to talk about. I already talked about our patch systems broken. And everybody says, okay, we're good. We got all this stuff. What about these guys? What about the Spectre attack, the meltdown attack, right? When you start thinking about it, this is the reality. This is what's taking place. Hardware-based attacks. So we can do all this cool stuff with software. The attackers found a way with hardware, right? And if those of you listen have heard of side channel attacks, well, I can use the environmental or the emanations or the electromagnetic leakage of the devices. I can use that and get information about the devices and compromise it. And this first graphic here, this is from the TrustWave report for 2020, so based on 2019 data, is scary for me because I work a lot with the FBI. And in California, where I live, in the United States and California, we lost $300 million in 2019 to business email compromise. And that's phishing. That's a phishing email. So despite all these phishing campaigns everybody's running and trying to train their users, remember what I said earlier, people click. So we have to accept the fact they're going to click. And that 27 million in that image there is from one car company subsidiary that they lost. They lost 27 million, one company, via business email compromise, right? And then you start looking at and you see it's all these different things. And we see the increase in phishing. I don't have an image on it, but the increase in mobile malware, 33% increase, right? Stuff like that. And it comes down to what? Your attack surface, right? I always try to explain when I train SOC analysts, stuff like that. They have to understand what their constituents or the people they're providing services use because you got to map that attack surface for them, right? Because right here's a perfect example. There was 207 vulnerabilities in the TrustWave research, right? Patched with database products. And it's great because if you've been following the forums, you see everybody talking about data and trying to secure the data. We had 207 new vulnerabilities come out in just the databases themselves. So if you have that database, you have that attack surface. And that's what you have to map if you're going to do your defense. Once we get those right, then we can start looking at the other defense type mechanisms. All right? And then those of you who are watching and listening, if you've ever used different types of things in MySQL, you see there was 118 denial of service vulnerabilities in MySQL. Now, as an offensive tester, I'm not a big fan of denial of service because what? It denies service. I don't get access to it. But as a defender, I'm concerned if that database has critical data and I can deny service to it and you can't get access to that critical data. So all these are the concern. As we see, their data showed a 50% increase of phishing that allowed more of these breaches. So when you start looking at it so far, everything's the same. Whatever we're trying has failed. 100 billion US dollars and we still have these problems. So let's look at some of the facts. And some of these are historical. And I put them in because some might think they were sophisticated attacks. We want to go through this because in reality, they were not sophisticated attacks, right? So remember that stat. Majority of these 56%, if I recall correctly, were organized criminal backed. Then you got the nation states. You got all those types of stuff. So we have the thing that's assumed breach, and there's different discussions on that. We won't argue about that. But I want to talk about some reality here. And this reality is the first one is the Secure ID source code compromise. All right, so EMC is the parent company of Secure ID. And EMC comes out and says that Secure ID source code has been compromised. And for those of you who don't remember, Secure ID is a token-based authentication. Probably some of you are using it. And it has a seed value. And if I know what that seed value is, I can predict what the number is and take that second factor of authentication. All right, so that's the concept. They posted and said it was a sophisticated attack. I posted a rebuttal of that saying it was not a sophisticated attack. And here was my reasoning. And when you think about it, Secure ID source code, this is a valuable product for them, very big for their business need. Well, the email, and it was a spear phishing email, so we'll give them credit. They did target the developers of the Secure ID source code. That is true. So they did do that research, but it was still phishing. It was phishing was the initial vector of access. So when they sent the email with the attachment, and the attachment was an Excel spreadsheet, and that attachment said next year's pay scale of the people that received it. I don't remember the exact numbers, but some of them opened it. And that attachment had an embedded macro. And everybody listening here knows macro documents are on the rise probably because we see more and more data that people are using Office documents again. Okay, so when that macro ran, then the attackers had infected their network. And they looked around like they will do for lateral movement. So they discovered the source code of Secure ID. The question number one I have for you is why is the source code of Secure ID on a publicly accessible network? That's question number one. I mean, when we put internet access to U.S. Navy warships, we didn't put the missiles and the communication systems on the same network segment as the internet. Why did they do that as Secure ID? And they're not the only ones. A lot of other people did it as well, stuff like that. EMC and, of course, RSA was the company. EMC is the parent company. Now, the other question I got for you, why in the world could you access it without having some form of a privilege check, right? Principal, least services, least privileges. You know, okay, you are the developer, but prove you're a developer by giving me credentials. But just forget all that. RSA, the company that created Secure ID, is known for Ron Rivest, Abel Shamir, and Adelman. Rivest, Shamir, and Adelman, the RSA of RSA encryption. So why was it on an actual public network, reachable, and not encrypted? Somebody explain that, all right? The Target breach. They didn't breach Target themselves. They breached heating, ventilation, and cooling. So when the heating, ventilation, and cooling laptop was infected and the user went and connected to the Target main networks, they discovered that the point-of-sale transaction network for the credit cards was on the same segment. Can anybody tell me why the point-of-sale transaction for credit cards is on the same segment as your heating, ventilation, and cooling? Again, makes no sense. And then WannaCry. And I got to give you a little bit of a history on this. 2008, Microsoft had a critical vulnerability called Microsoft Server Service, and the bulletin number for Microsoft was MS008, right? So MS08, which is 2008, 067, the 67th vulnerability of 2008. Okay. At that time, I was speaking at conferences like I am now, and I explained to people that the vector or the path of how that attack breach happens is port 445. And hopefully some of you understand port 445 is net bias. And net bias is a local area network protocol. So since it's a local area network protocol, what's that mean? It should be local area network. Self-explanatory. So can anybody tell me why in 2008 you had port 445, that local area network protocol, open to inbound from the internet and open to outbound from your network? It should never happen, right? That's 2008. And I was telling people at conferences, if you leave that port open, it's the same as leaving your door open for 24 hours and see what's happening because you're leaving the door open to your network. Now let's fast forward to 2017. And the Microsoft bulletin number for the WannaCry vulnerability is MS17, which is 2017, 010. And guess what the actual vector is? Port 445. It's the same vector from 2008. And we didn't learn our lesson because all these infected machines got infected. These are all the issues. These are all the problems, right? So again, it's a simple thing to prevent. Inbound traffic, block port 45. Outbound traffic, block point 445. Then you don't get infected, and then you don't spread. Very easy, right? And then over 10 years, it's said fundamentals defense. But now I want to talk about advanced persistent threat. Because APT, oh yeah, we hear about it all the time. It's great. It's definitely. It's a huge concern. But what I want you to understand is we have to take care of the fundamentals. Because remember, as it says there, over 10 years, most of these attacks are blocked by fundamentals. Okay, so we have to take care of what we call the basic persistent threat. Let's make sure that when we do this, our networks are protected from these fundamental attacks. And that's the scary part, right? So we talked about different vendors, and we'll call out F5. Because F5 had a vulnerability recently, not that long ago. If any of you have F5 and you're using it, again, like I said before, doesn't matter the vendor you have. You've accepted the vulnerabilities for its entire lifetime. Please understand that. So because of that, if you had the F5, big IP, all right, that's what they love to talk about, you had that vulnerability. And that's fine. We know there's going to be vulnerabilities. But it scares me because the vulnerability was very basic. I think 2006, we showed people how to fix the vulnerability. Here we are in 2020, and we get the vulnerability in one of our main commercial vendor products. It shouldn't happen, right? But it does. It continues to happen. So that's why we got to get the basics right. Let's do segmentation isolation, right? Why is data, in the case of secure ID, stuff like that, the case of target breach as well, why is data sharing the same network segment as a point of sale transaction for a credit card, as our source code for one of our main products? These are the questions that have to be answered. Not, oh, it was a sophisticated attack, it was this or it was that. What can we do from the basic fundamental level to reduce the damage? Sorry, but if any of you have listened and you've been hit by ransomware and it's taken you down, and like 2 cities in Florida paid the ransom, stuff like that, I'm sorry, your network's poorly segmented. You have poor ingress inbound and poor egress outbound filtering, because it shouldn't happen. You might lose even 1 machine, 2 machines, even a whole segment, but it should not take down your entire organization. Out in California, the Hollywood Hospital not being able to accept patients. It's not acceptable. Sorry, that's just something that shouldn't happen. And that leads me to the bottom of the threat here, the vendor persistent threat. Network diagrams, network architecture reviews. When we go in and we look at network architectures, I'm amazed at how many people have poor network architectures, poor segmentation, and they paid for it. They paid for this design. So I'm doing all these different assessments, and I've got people terminating their wireless inside the firewall. I mean, just fundamentals you would never do, right? And the main thing to remember is when you look at your network architecture, are you segmented? Is data and users sharing things anywhere, any data and users share anywhere in your network? It shouldn't happen. Your data should be separated from your users, right? That's the fundamental. So if users click, they can't get to the data. They being the attackers without more help, right? These are all the types of different things. And that's the scary part about WannaCry going to that. It wasn't 1 click, it was 3 clicks. And they still clicked. People still clicked. And the scary part is when you pay the ransomware and malware people, what happens? You end up with more and more. So the Grand Crab malware, some of you listening might have actually had the Grand Crab ransomware malware, and the 2 designers announced they're retiring. And the reason they're retiring, they made $1 billion on that malware. Now, we don't know if it's actually true or not, but hey, I'm sure they made a lot. Because like I said, in America, here in the United States, people have been paying a lot of money to get their data back. And it's frustrating because it shouldn't happen. And the last thing before we move on to the next slide, Target, it's estimated Target spent more than $1 million before that breach. And the $1 million software detected the breach. But there's no process in place to action it. And it was never escalated in action belonging to Tier 1. Tier 1 did escalate it, but Tier 2 never took it to the next level. And because of that, the CEO and the CIO resigned, and the reality was that detection of the breach was 4 days before the data was compromised. So no product's going to protect you if no process is in place. All right. So this is the radical concepts. We've talked about all the different methods. We've tried everything, right? Keep them out. We tried. We spent over $100 billion in cybersecurity products. It didn't work. We got to get smarter. And when you look at this, this really is a shock for some people when we start telling them, let them in. Let them in. Let them into your network. And everybody's like, let them in. Remember, they're going to get in anyway. So if we have things around, so if they get in, we identify them, it's a win, right? So we've already spent all the money. So keep your obstacles in place. You have all those products, those cybersecurity products, those types of things, but be ready for them to get in. Because we know we can't stop them. We can't keep them out 100%. And that's why we have to think of another way. And that way is to let them in. And the key is, once they get in, isolate and destroy them, all right? That's the whole concept here. That's the key. We want to isolate and destroy them. And how do we do that? We interrupt their access, all right? So as I said, I teach and I've been training for many, many years since I started and worked with the DoD, Department of Defense for the United States Red Team. And I've trained thousands and thousands of ethical hackers, pen testers, stuff like that. And we all follow a structured process. So now we're on defense. So what do we do on defense? We look at that process, which we'll look at here momentarily, and we use it to our advantage. And that's what this is all about. All right. So what you have to remember is, unless that attacker's on the host machine, they're on a connection to my machine. If they're on a connection to my machine, that's my network. I know the network, all right, as I'm showing here in that second bullet. I control it. I designed it. If I designed it, I know how it works. You don't know how it works. Anybody listening out there, when you're doing your analysis, you know when you do pen testing, security testing, everything else, what do? Recon, footprinting, reconnaissance. You got to map the network. You got to figure out what the network design is. I don't have to figure that out. I created it, all right? And that access is almost always layer 3. When I click on a link and they get on the machine, they've got an IP address on my network. But remember, it's my network. It's not theirs. I know they're going to get on a machine. Then they're going to phone home and tell the command and control center that, hey, we're on the network, and they'll become a bot, right? That's an infected machine. That's a bot. Well, what's the next step it does? It's going to move, lateral movement. It's going to try to move and find another machine to increase to its collection of bots. So when it does that, we have to be ready for that, right? So this is this concept here. We call it shapeshift. We're going to shapeshift the network. So once somebody gets in our network and they hit one of our triggers, as we're going to discuss momentarily, we know we're prepared for that trigger. When they hit that trigger, we're going to do what? Critical alert. You got malware in a segment, right? All we have to do is disrupt. All we do is we disrupt their process. If we disrupt their process, it's a win for us in security. And that's the way the concepts we want to start thinking about. And this is the most important component. And this is the one I try to show everybody all the time. Forever, the attackers, and I was on offense too, we always brag. We only need one way in. With one way in, we win. Yay, we win. But guess what? We flip the advantage. Because with deception and ghosts and triggers, as we'll talk about, those types of things, I only need one packet. You send one packet to my decoy, critical alert, I know you're on my segment. Moreover, I know where you're at on my segment. And that's the critical thing to take away here. I can put these decoys and triggers all over the network, and we'll look at some different concepts of that, right? We have changed the advantage. So with deception as a defense, we change the advantage to our favor. And I like that, all right? And this is what I was talking about for a successful hack. And when you think about it, this is a process. Now, there's different ways of explaining it and stuff like that. Surveillance, footprint, enumerate, identify vulnerabilities, exploitation, which is validation of vulnerabilities, which is penetration testing, and then cover your tracks and evasion, right? Those different types of things. So when you start thinking about it, that's that process I told you about. That process hasn't changed since I started doing this stuff in 1993. What has changed? The tools we have available, which makes the attackers much more effective because the tools are very powerful. And the other thing that's changed? The targets. We have all these different things, embedded devices, anything that's at layer 3, an IP address is a target. So these are the important things to understand. All right. And now let's talk about how attackers work. That click brings in the infection. Once you bring in the infection, they're going to try to spread. And that's what we're showing here on the slide as we infect number 1. And then number 2, we can't get any infection on number 2, but then we find number 3 and number 4. And number 4 is connected to another network. So we can pivot or access that other network. This is the concept, right? All these are the different types of things you want to think about. So when you do this, if I hit over here any of these machines and it's a decoy or a trigger, you're going to go to critical alert, because when I touch that machine, nothing should touch that machine. If you touch it, you're malicious. You've infected wherever that source is. That machine's infected, right? Which is the first source of the infection. And then I start doing my isolation of the data. And remember, we don't want to start thinking about this is an impossible task. This is deception focused on different layers. All we have to do is break one step of that methodology. If I can break one step of the methodology, it's a win. And then what do? We require the hacker to start the process all over again. How do we do it? Decoys. Set up machines in your networks, decoys that should never receive a packet. If that machine receives a packet, it's malicious. Go to critical alert. Now, you can do decoy ports. You can take a machine that exists and just set up a port. Decoy services, decoy networks. It's up to you. There's 100,000 different ways to do it. And set up in your monitors. You've paid for all these monitors anyway. Set up in your monitors, do what? Critical alert, you got malware on the segment. That's the goal. Examine the source and isolate it. Isolate at the switch or the segment boundary. That's why even the most severe ransomware infection, you shouldn't lose your entire network. If you lose your entire network, then that's a problem. So how do you do it? It's simple. We have the world of virtualization. You can take your existing servers, all this other stuff that you have. You know that we've got virtual machines all over the place. So what I've got here on the slide is what we call decoys. And this is a tiny Linux VM. It has nothing open by default. It's a perfect layer 3 target. And I think everybody listening has 48 megabyte of RAM that they can spare. And that's it. Just by setting this up and putting in your monitoring devices that nothing should talk to that layer 3 or that IP address, that's it. Once you've done that, you've got a decoy on the segment. 48 mega RAM doesn't take a lot of actual resources. So do lots of decoys. Multiple decoys on each and every segment. And by doing those multiple decoys on each and every segment, you're doing what? Setting up triggers. So if I get in and I start looking, you're going to see me looking, me being the attacker. That's the concept. It's not difficult to do. We've already got all this stuff. So you're probably saying, well, how do we do it? Good question. All right. And remember, I'll try to get some questions at the end. Still got a demo if I get time, but we'll see. Tools. This goes all the way back many, many years ago. In fact, if you take that reference for Fred Cohen created the Deception Toolkit, you'll be shocked that it's 20 years ago plus. And it's still there. It's still available. We were doing deception with the Deception Toolkit in 20 years ago. Decept, right? Decept is an actual honey hash or a token that we put into Active Directory. And what that is, we know people are going to click and get out of an environment. There's all the silver ticket, gold ticket, curb roasting, all these great attacks. So what we do is we put in a user into Active Directory that's not real. It's a ghost or a honeypot of a user, a honey token as we call it. And what we do is if you use Mimikatz or some of the other techniques and you dump and extract the hashes of the Kerberos ticket, those types of things, critical alert, you got malware on the segment. And as I said, the commercial world started to do this as well. It's not new, but commercial tools are out there, and we got examples here, TrapX and Symmetria. So there's different solutions you can use. And somebody's saying, well, is there other ways? And I love this because, yes, you have canary tokens. And canary tokens are beautiful because you can create custom tokens. And I use this for websites. I do it on different things. Why? Because I can put in these types of things. I can put in a web bug that's a fake URL. It's a token URL. If anybody accesses it, I put into my HTTP Hypertext Transfer Protocol access logs or DNS, wherever I want, that URL that if somebody queries it or uses it, critical alert, you've been infected. I can do it with DNS names. I can do it with email addresses, right? I can do it with Word documents and put in macros that are there specifically to entice the attacker. So when they open a document, we've got them, right? Critical documents, stuff like that. PDFs, we all know about PDFs. Windows folders. These are all free. I encourage you to check out Canary tokens. These are things we can do to help protect ourselves, right? And this is the one I was talking about with the cloned website. I love the cloned website because if anybody clones one of my websites, there's an alert because it's cloned, and I put an actual reference to a URL, an href, for those of you who've been out there and ever coded in HTML, that has a reference back to my beacon point that pings me and tells me, hey, somebody just accessed a web page that you set up as a clone trigger, right? Deception. Look, you got QR codes, you got SVN, you got AWS keys. You name it, you have it, right? And this is the important thing to understand. We are in control. All right. And now the data for you. This works, right? And it's amazing how easy it works. So we did this at a Capture the Flag. And 2018, Hacker Halted Conference. The team that was coming in from North Carolina had a hurricane and they couldn't come in. So they asked us to build a Capture the Flag, me and my team. And we did. And we decided we're not going to put in a traditional flat network Capture the Flag. We're going to put in a Capture the Flag that has layers in it, and you're going to have to figure out where the doors are, right? And that's what we're saying here. For 6 hours, we watched people struggle trying to figure out what was real and what was a decoy. And I'll show this network diagram time permitting at the end and explain it if I've got the time. And the thing is, we proved that what? It works. Not only does it works very well. Because when we set up decoys, we set up triggers, I don't care who the hacker is, they have to send a packet. Once they send one packet, I can spin up fake virtual environments. There's so much more we can do with this. We control our network. And that's the biggest takeaway I want you to understand from this. I'm in control of my network because I built it. You are too. Whoever built your network, they know it better than the attacker will. That's what you want to focus on. Don't listen to the vendors, right? No product's going to make you secure. We've already tried that. It doesn't work, right? As I said, we control layer 3. And we only need one packet. I want you to remember that. Forever, they've had the advantage, the attacker. We have it now. We only need one packet. And that's the beauty of this. Start with your critical segments. Put the deception decoys around. Try it. Experiment. Put it in a lab environment. Try it out. If you have red teamers or you have groups that do your vulnerability assessment pen testing, set up decoys. Put it in your monitors and see if when you hit that one packet, you get the critical alert on the segment. We're in control. Don't start thinking that we've lost. We can control where the attackers go. And remember, all we have to do is slow down and confuse them so we can move our data, right? Some of you listening might have heard of microsegmentation, which is big in the government out here in the United States now, where we just keep shifting the data to different areas. So when the breach does happen, the data moves. So hopefully you move it for the breach. So the concepts of defense and deception in my next book, which I'll talk about at the end, exactly does that. Shows you how to do that. All right. So what about artificial intelligence? Because, yeah, we have processing power today where we can run artificial intelligence we've never had. So now we can use it for deception. Because what we can do is we can take an example here, the Movidius, the Movidius chip here from Intel. And it's a neural network type computer stick. And it does image recognition. We can use those types of things to do what? Record our network traffic for that segment. So what we do when we record that network traffic for the segment is we learn, or the artificial intelligence algorithm learns what that segment does. And then they emulate the same network traffic. So when the attacker comes in, they see emulated traffic. They don't know what's real and what's the actual thing. It looks like real traffic. So they start following the emulated traffic while we move the data away. We're starting to deploy this in operational technology networks with just replaying network traffic, and it confuses and frustrates the attacker. And that's the whole goal here. Stop giving them the advantage. We just need one packet. All right. This is a Raspberry Pi Zero using a tool called Ponagachi. So Ponagachi uses another hacking tool called BetterCap. So you might want to look at some of this and stuff as well, because we can set this up as a deception decoy. And if they come in wirelessly and they talk to a deception decoy, critical alert, because somebody's talking to a decoy on wireless. Your users should all know where to go on wireless. If anybody talks to a decoy that's on wireless, that's malicious. That's somebody probing, somebody doing that what? Reconnaissance and footprinting. And like we said, all we have to do is identify with that one packet and go to suspicious red alert because somebody's talking to something that shouldn't work. One of the analogies I like to use, it's a minefield. So in your network segment, you have mines all around. So when the malware infects the first machine and tries to move around, it hits a mine. The mine is your incident monitor that comes up and tells you, boom, you have malware on the segment because somebody just talked to one of your triggers. All right. And this is what I wanted to show you. This is the example of what I deployed at that Hacker Halted. I won't spend too much time on here because I want to demo still and get a little bit of interaction on your questions. And I'll actually type in and answer them all anyway if I don't get to them before I have to shut down. But when you look here, this is where they came in. They came in on a Class B 172.16.0.0/16. They had to scan the entire network and find the targets. Now, I have very easy targets here. Targets that everybody would know, Metasploitable, Windows 7 with WannaCry vulnerability, Windows Server here with MS08067, Windows Server 2003. But look where it's right here. Decoys. These decoys were ghosts. And they couldn't figure out what was a ghost and what was real. So hours they spent down here in this /B subnet, they never hit these three boxes that was there ready for the taking. I thought they'd have got them, but nobody did. Because one minute scan, they had 50 targets. Next minute scan, they had 20. What did we do? We confused and frustrated them, right? And then I had routers. These were all routers here that were gates into other networks that the DNS names here, the DNS servers, were representative of those other networks. And what happened is they had to go through the gate to get to the other side. Well, number one, they didn't know which gate was what. And number two, when you look here, only one gate was real. These were decoy gates with a bunch of other machines to keep them busy. And I could do all kinds of stuff because they were in a network that I knew was a decoy. All our monitors, we could shift the data, we could isolate anything we want. That's how the process works. And I said, for 6 hours, they struggled with this, and nobody could figure out how it worked, right? All right. So now I want to show the demo. So let's see if the demo will work here. If not, we go into the questions I put up the last slide. Hopefully, you can see my screen. I'll take a minute to take a drink of water here for it to refresh for you. I posted this on the app, and I posted it, asked if any of you had ever heard of Network Security Toolkit, right? So Network Security Toolkit, which you're looking at here, is an open source network security toolkit that has most of your free 125 tools. So if I start playing the video here, very simple when you look at this. Alert, IP, any source, destination. And the destination is port 445. This is a layer 4 deception decoy, right? So when I come in here, layer 4 trigger malware on the segment. So in Snort, we just create a rule that says we got a trigger on a segment. And remember, 445 is both the WannaCry vector and the MS08067 I told you about. So now all I have to do is connect to that, all right? And that was it. I set this thing up, reload the rules on the Snort sensor. Remember, this is all free open source. So you don't have to always spend money on these types of tools. And then I used the ever-famous tool Netcat, and look what happened. Critical, layer 4 trigger malware on segment, one port. All it took was one connection to that port. Critical alert, I got malware on the segment. So I'm going to speed this up here so I can get to the actual layer 3 decoys. And then I'm going to put the last slide up and start looking at your questions. and see what I can answer of that. So again, this is port 445, and you can see already in the background there the alert happens. So right here, when I go over here, critical alert, malware on the segment. Every one of you can set up this. You've already got monitors. You've paid lots of money probably for SIM products, all those types of things. You just put in a rule. You put in a rule, if this IP address, or in this case, this IP address port combination is ever seen, you got critical malware on the segment, right? So different things you can do there. So this is the process of how you want to do it. All right. So now what I'm going to do, the last part of the demo here, and I'll get to it, I'm going to do an actual layer 3. So the tool I'm using here is fping. So you're seeing fping responded, but this is La Brea Tar Pit. It's an older tool. It's not updated, but it still works. And that's the beauty of this. We can make all these different types of tools. And you see here, responded to a ping. So all those live systems, I moved a little too fast. Go back here, right here. All those live systems are not live. They're ghosts. They're decoys. So the attacker or the perpetrator, when they scan, they see these live systems. But it doesn't matter because remember, it's one packet. So as soon as that one packet goes out to one of these decoys, you go into your incident response mode, critical alert, you've been breached. You got malware on the segment, right? That's what I want you to take away from this. And that's the whole goal here. It's just La Brea is doing this for us, right? And La Brea, because it's named after the La Brea Tar Pits, will do, when you do a port scan, put you into what they call the La Brea Tar. And that's how the process works, right? And the configuration here is just to show you the last thing. I can put in exclusion, right? Exclusion targets. All right, so now let's get to the last slide. And I'm going to, with the last slide, show you, if I can get back here, the last slide, and I'll look at your questions as I show you my contact details and the new book. The new book should be out within a couple of weeks, hopefully. It's close. And let me see if I got any questions on here in the last 3 minutes before we actually do shut down. All right, I got some questions. All right, so good topic, more than helpful. Yeah, thank you on that. So does anybody have any other questions? I put some concepts on there for you, right? So if you look under the questions for the presentation, the session, questions for deploying advanced defense and deception, I asked you, in your organization, have you established a minimal security baseline? If not, that's step one. Make sure you know your attack surface for every machine that goes out on your network. That's an important thing. Then I asked you, are you aware of the concepts of black hole routing? And let me explain black hole routing real quick since I got a couple minutes. With black hole routing, simple concept, your DNS server, right? So when you do a DNS query, one of your machines, your clients do, it should go to your internal DNS server and out to the external DNS and out to the internet. If it doesn't, you're susceptible to 90% of the malware, because 90% of the malware, yes, uses direct DNS queries. So how you prevent that? You prevent it by, we call it black hole routing, because you check at your perimeter is the next stream upstream is when the traffic goes out is the source address, the address of your internal DNS server. If the source address is not the address of your internal DNS server, critical alert, somebody's trying to do a direct DNS query. If you do research, you'll discover the fact that 90% of the DNS queries are direct by malware. If you stop that with an internal DNS to an external DNS, you just block 90% of the malware. HTTPS, HTTP traffic, 80 and 443 port respectively. Make sure that traffic is proxied. And then any traffic that tries to go direct to the internet as a website, block it, because that's another popular method of doing it, right? And then the other one is, remember what a server, right? Remember what a server does. A server receives connections. does not generate connections. Do not allow your servers to generate connections. It's a very simple fix. I covered in the book. You've got my details there. I'll share it with you. I've got career pathway documents. Those of you listening, if you want to actually build your cybersecurity skills foundation, because I still think that's one of the most important things you can find. So connect with me on LinkedIn or send me an email. Feel free to connect and those types of things. Let's see. Amazing presentation. Great. Thank you. Appreciate it very much. How do you get a new book in Egypt? It's going to be released on all the main markets. So it'll be on Amazon and all those types of things. So you should be able to get it there. All right. So with that, I got 1 minute here left before I end the stream. And I thank you very much for attending. And you'll see me in the forum still. I'm still in the forum. I'm answering questions, stuff like that. You can reach out to me there or reach out to me in either one of those. And as I said, start looking into the different ways. Because the main thing to remember is we can defend. We know our network better than the attackers do. And that's the most important thing. Make it harder on them, confuse and frustrate them. Thank you very much.